So when I was in graduate school, I had this amazing professor who I really loved. He was intelligent, unique, eccentric, just really kind of out of this world. But he wasn't a Martian, right? Um, Although he did this exercise with us whenever he wanted us to explain a concept that we had just learned, or maybe we have an idea for a new project that we wanted to do. He would say to us, explain it to me like I'm a Martian. And he would kind of role play himself being an alien, from another planet who's just arrived here and has no idea about what it's like to be a human being, let alone someone living in the United States and the contemporary United States. And now explain it to me, right? And I want to start with this idea, this exercise, because in this video and in the upcoming 2 videos, I'm going to be introducing the Speech 1 assignment. And the goal of Speech number 1 is to introduce yourself to your audience by talking about yourself and your cultural identity, your membership in a culture, a community, or a social group that you will talk to us about and teach us about. And for some of you, that's brainstorming process is going to be relatively easy. Perhaps some of your cultural memberships or cultural identities is going to be fairly obvious to you. Perhaps you're an international student, say from the African nation of Sudan, and you're here now. You're going to tell us something about your experience living in Sudan. Or maybe you're the child of immigrants. Perhaps your parents are from Guatemala, and you want to tell us something about your Guatemalan heritage. Those are all options. Of course, you could talk about many other things, as I'll mention later on. You don't just have to talk about your national or ethnic identities. However, some of my students I have found in the past have a more difficult time seeing themselves as someone that belongs to a culture. And typically that's because they consider themselves as kind of a mainstream, normal American, right? And remember in the textbook, we'll be reading about the idea of a mythical norm, right? And so there are some people, perhaps you are surrounded by representations that kind of reflect yourself back at you, that you don't think of yourself as kind of unique, at least in the context of the United States. And we use the term mythical norm because if you zoom out, to a more universal perspective, which is what we're trying to do quite often in a university education, right? You come to realize that you aren't a typical human being at all on a planet of several billion people with hundreds of different national identities, thousands of different cultural identities and language groups, and millions and millions of different social scenes and social groups, right? You are a very particular person at a very particular time and place. No matter who you are, all human beings belong to cultural groups and other social groups or communities, right? And if you were introducing yourself to a Martian, it would be interesting to that Martian, the groups that you belong to, and they would have a lot of questions about what does that mean, being who you are, right? So let's begin perhaps by brainstorming ideas of how would you introduce yourself and your cultural identity to a Martian. All right. In this video and in the next 2 videos, I'm gonna talk about the topic and the purpose of this assignment. Then we'll look at some of the basic requirements and expectations for the assignment. And then finally, in the final video, we'll take a quick look at the rubric of evaluation. But I'm gonna now show you the assignment prompt, which you'll see here. You can download this in the Canvas modules, and the title of the assignment is Self and Culture. It's 6 pages, quite a bit of information broken down into different sections, and then it ends with this rubric here. I'm not going to read it to you word for word, so be sure to download that document, consider even printing it out and make sure that you read it very closely. Instead of reading it word for word, I'm going to use this presentation in the next few videos. So here we go. The speech assignment is to introduce yourself and your culture to an audience. Here's the basic assignment description. It's a 3 to 5 minute extemporaneously delivered speech. When you read the prompt, you'll hear that it mentions that the time as I measure it starts at the attention getter, the very first things out of your mouth when you're giving the speech, all the way to the closing line of the speech. So it doesn't include any setup and takedown that you do when recording the video. So 3 to 5 minutes of actual speech time. And you'll note in the assignment prompt that I mentioned I will not accept speeches that are under 2 minutes this time. And so make sure that your speech is near, at minimum, the 3-minute mark. It's to be extemporaneously delivered. We're going to be reading soon a chapter on delivery, and I want to just show you that portion of the textbook that explains what extemporaneous delivery is. This is on page 231. Remember, you want to look at the page number that's actually on the page. This is on page 231, explaining what extemporaneous speaking is. Unlike memorized speaking, where you are fully memorized and you have no notes, which would be like stage acting, right? And unlike manuscript speaking, which is you have the entire speech word for word in front of you and you just read it, extemporaneous speaking is kind of a combination of impromptu, speaking off the cuff, and manuscript speaking, memorized speaking in a memorized manner. But here it goes. Here's how we define extemporaneous speaking. It's the presentation of a carefully planned and rehearsed speech that you're trying to speak in a conversational manner using brief notes. We'll use note cards using key words to guide yourself, right? So you've prepared it, you've practiced it, a good portion of it is memorized, but you're using a brief set of notes to guide you. And some of the advantages of this is that it's going to show to your audience that you are prepared because you have rehearsed and that you're knowledgeable, and that'll increase your ethos, your credibility. You know the speech well enough that you're not reading it to them. You're also not just making it up as you go along, right? So it doesn't feel totally off the top of your head. In addition, your audience is likely to pay better attention because you can be engaging. You're not looking down or handling a manuscript. You're not reading in that kind of droning, robotic fashion that some people do when they read out loud. So it's engaging. You're able to make eye contact with the audience, and you're able to get feedback from the audience. You're looking at the audience almost the entire time. You're glancing down at your note cards to prompt your memory, but then you're looking back up and you're speaking directly to your audience. And it allows you flexibility, right? If you need to delete, add, rephrase something, if something comes out of order, you're able to kind of think on your toes and rearrange the speech slightly or restate the speech slightly if you notice that perhaps an audience member is confused. Another advantage, I think, is that unlike memorized, where you're trying to get the speech word for word memorized, and sometimes what happens is if you drop one line or if you drop one word, you kind of go blank and you're stuck, right? With extemporaneous speaking, you're not worried about memorizing each word in a very particular order. You're more worried about memorizing the ideas that you wish to express, the order of those ideas, and then you are trying to allow yourself to say those ideas in different ways, perhaps, each time you practice it, so that the order of words or the particular word choices don't matter as much to you as expressing the ideas in a given order. It gives you more flexibility and freedom, and it also gives you a sense of presence before your audience. It's an event that's occurring right here, right now. Okay. The purpose of this speech is to introduce yourself to an imagined audience of professional peers. In the textbook, it doesn't talk about introducing yourself as one of the three main purposes, which it'll talk about to entertain, to inform, and to persuade. But we might think of an introduction speech as a kind of speech to entertain and a little bit of a speech to inform, right? You're trying to show yourself as a likable, fun, interesting person. So you're entertaining your audience and you're informing them about aspects of your personality. And in particular, our way into talking about yourself for this assignment is going to be to tell your audience about a culture, community, or social scene that you belong to and what belonging to that culture, community, or social scene means to you. So I think it's very important to keep in mind that you are the subject of the speech, right? So ultimately, all of this is about you and who you are. Your way into talking about yourself is to talk about what we'll call your cultural identity, or a particular aspect or a particular dimension of your cultural identity. That means that you're not simply teaching us about the culture. You're teaching us about your relationship to that culture. So what is culture? That's going to be an important thing to kind of understand. We're not going to dig too deep into this, but read the prompt. It'll give you some more information about this, and think about what you've learned in some of your other classes about what culture is. Culture is a pattern of behavior, a way of living. I like to think of it as just a group, right? Any group, it could be a giant, group made up of millions and millions of people. It could be your friendship group, just three of you, and what you do on a Friday night, right? Culture is kind of something we do together when we share time and space and activities with other people. So we might think of culture more anthropologically as our homeland, our ethnicity or our ancestral background. I gave the example of being from Sudan or having heritage in Guatemala, or maybe you're an Italian American, a Black American. All of these potentially are ways into talking about who you are. They're groups that you belong to. But I also want to extend the idea of culture to include co-cultures, right? And co-cultures are kind of smaller cultures that are made up of people who share similar activities, behaviors, values, mindsets, or dress. It's your group affiliation, potentially, who you spend your time with, what you spend your time doing. And so fandoms, for example, if you are maybe a Raiders football fan, you might think of that as Raiders culture, right? Or football culture. And maybe you're a lowrider enthusiast, or maybe you're a break dancer or a graffiti artist. All of these are kind of groups that you belong to, and you share with other people certain languages or terminology or concepts or actions or values or mindsets or dress, right? So all of us belong to many different groups, from our families to our churches, to the other social groups we might hang out with or spend time with in society. So lots of different ways into talking about, and I even use the term in the prompt. I say you could talk about a culture, a community, or even a social scene, right? So any of those ideas, basically groups that you belong to, would be acceptable for this speech. You want to pick one for this assignment. How is this not an informative speech? We're going to do that for speech number 2. So I want to differentiate. Yes, you're informing us about yourself and your relationship, your personal experience with your culture. But you don't need to do any research. That's the first thing, right? You don't need to research anything outside of yourself and your own experience. So in speech 2, that's what you're going to do. You're going to focus on a topic that's outside of yourselves. You're going to research that topic, find good sources of information, synthesize those sources, and then teach us that topic. Speech 1 is a personal introduction, right? Your goal is to reveal who you are to your audience. The way into doing that is to talk about your cultural self. Yourself is the topic. And so the entire speech ideally is staying focused on you, your experience, your values, your understanding, your feelings about this group that you belong to. How is this not a persuasive speech? Well, speech 3 assignment is going to be a persuasive speech. A persuasive speech is trying to solve a problem by telling us what to believe in, what to value, or what to do. So some of you may, maybe you're saying, I'm a gym rat. I go to the gym, I work out, right? Well, if that's your topic for speech number 1, tell us about your experience going to the gym. Tell some stories about it, right? Tell us about your favorite exercises and why those are your favorite exercises. Tell us about your journey from not going to the gym to going to the gym. But keep it personal and keep it aimed at yourself, right? Your goal in this speech is not to convince your audience to go to the gym, to start working out, right? That might enter into your speech, or you might be something you say at one point, but it's not at all the central focus. The central purpose of this speech is just to introduce yourself and your cultural membership. So save problems and solutions, or encouraging us to take some sort of action. Save that for speech number 3. All right, I'm going to pick up here in the next video.